Hey folks, I'm back again. It's July the 9th, 2017, and I wanted to discuss a few things. I don't know about you folks, but the further I get on Nofap, I just really start having these vivid dreams, and I get the feeling that a lot of this stuff is like repressed memories and emotions and such that I've kind of just shoved down there with, for years with PMO in particular, but just in general, whatever I could use to escape from, my day-to-day reality. And I wanted to talk about those vivid dreams. I wanted to talk about the idea of loss and just, like my attempts to avoid that through PMO. Other folks probably, their attempts to avoid it through PMO and other addictions. And the idea of assumptions and just like how that can affect our nofap journey, in particular, but just life in general. Um, One of my vivid dreams recently, it was kind of strange, I have to put it lightly. I think I was overseas and I was part of some sort of task force that was supposed to defend you know, people in general against some sort of attacker. And I ended up like where I was like at some like almost train station. I was having to defend this specific group of folks that I remember I turned around and looked at them and it was like, after I woke up, I'd seen them, and I turned around again in the dream, and I went and defended them against someone else. I remember waking up and thinking about the image of those folks, and they were some, attractive women, and they were like specifically of the type that I've kind of had an attraction towards, and I idealized for so many years, and the kind of girl like, oh, my dream girl, if I can find my dream girl, she'd look like this, she would dress like this, she would, etc., etc. And I think the deal with that, why that's been such a repressed memory, if in case this dream is actually just a repressed memory manifested in a symbolic manner, has been that I had an experience several years ago, and it's kind of, I've had sort of a repetition of these experiences where that that idealization was essentially just like smashed in front of my face, so to speak. Um, basically, like I idealized this, specific kind of girl, so to speak, and I was brought to the realization that that kind of girl doesn't actually exist. It's kind of like waking up to the real world, where you can have someone who seems so religious and pious and chaste and idealistic and at the same time physically attractive, but that they're like not giving away um, their whatever you want to call it to whoever they can get their hands on, or whoever's Mr. Right now. They're since they're religious and pious and chaste and all that, that their ideals trump their sexual marketplace value. That even if they have a high sexual marketplace value, they're not going to be throwing their pearls before the swine, that sort of thing, or giving dogs whatever's holy. To quote that verse from the Gospel according to Mark. And I'm quoting that in particular because it's actually quoted in the 48 Laws of Power. I'm not quoting it for any sort of per se religious purposes, even though the girls I did idealize were at least outwardly religious. But that kind of verse kind of sums up um, I guess kind of sums it up in a sense, like as far as like what I thought those girls were kind of like, and to have that kind of smashed in front of me, so to speak, smashed to pieces and revealed that it's all, in a sense, it's kind of a sense of lie, it's fake. That really traumatized me, and I suppose for me, in part, like PMO pornography, especially certain types of pornography, I could use to imagine that that either I was the guy who got to have sexual relations with that kind of woman and partake of that purity or what have you, or that I could, at least in my mind, live out the fantasy of it actually being real, something like that. And that is probably one of the reasons why pornography got to be so addictive. I could play out my fantasies in that whole realm, and the irony is kind of like, that you come down from that high, literally and figuratively speaking, and you're back in the real world, and you're having to contend with the fact that those fantasies are just fantasies. They're not real, and I'll get that kind of sense of loss once more. It would be amplified because I would have, on some biological level, almost like experienced the fantasy as reality, but then having it switched once more to what it really is, which is that it's a fantasy, and that would really hit me strongly. And I wouldn't say that I'm over contending with that, that loss, that loss of, at least one of my dreams, so to speak, in life. I'm still contending with it because, it's almost like ironic in a sense, because it's almost like I keep on running into those kinds of girls where, part of me wants to be the rational, logical person and say, this is all for show. Don't, judge a book by its cover. She's probably just like all the rest, etc., etc. And the other part of me, that small part of me that's still alive, wanted to be idealistic and like be like that die-hard romantic that believes, oh, this is the girl, she's gonna be different than all the others. Well, that part gets disappointed, and those feelings get brought back again, and it's kind of like I have to try and dodge some bullet once more. And this is all while, I already have a girlfriend, and obviously, like, most of this stuff, if not all of it, plays out in my head, thankfully. I would say thankfully, because if it wasn't playing out in my head alone, then it would be, straight up cheating. And I haven't done that. It's in my head. The emotions are there. I'm really just trying to contend with past traumas and experiences, and it's kind of almost like a one-to-one correspondence occurs in these, or near one-to-one correspondence occurs when I come across these folks. And I think this is why I still end up having these kinds of dreams, and I think, like I said, as I get further and further on Nofap, these things are kind of rising to the surface, and I'm really starting to actually try and resolve the underlying sources of negativity and just disappointment, sadness, the desire to run off to a fantasy land where I don't have to live in this sort of not only humdrum mentality or life, but a life where I can't escape mediocrity, and I have to, in a sense, like, have all the bad things that that on average happen to folks, whether that's, seeing my parents' marriage and seeing all the kind of garbage and abuse that goes on in there and saying I don't want that, or it's been, idealizing some specific girl, having I guess what's called like one-itis, and then having that one-itis kind of blow up in your face, and you realize that, she's just like all the rest of them, and hey, c'est la vie, that's life, But it's all part of like growing up. I think you have to get to a point where you can accept the flawed nature of people, the flawed nature of life, and you really realize, like, what is the bare minimum for you? What's the bare minimum that's going to make you happy? You can't have things perfect. Nobody's perfect. You're not perfect. You can't expect perfection from your girlfriend, your fiance, your wife. You can't expect perfection from yourself. So, like, what's the bare minimum that's going to make you happy? What's going to wipe away that feeling of loss and actually give you at least enough satisfaction out of life that, you can get on with life, and when it all does come to an end, you'll at least be at peace with it. So, what else was I going to talk about? Oh, yeah. So I talked about vivid dreams. I talked about the sense of loss, or that whole idea, and how it relates to Nofap, because, that's part of where so much of my addiction came from. The final thing I wanted to cover was this whole idea of assumptions. Now, for me, it relates to Nofap because for the longest time, I just kind of assumed that, pornography usage, if not addiction, was just part of life. Even when, I was born, grew up, before Nofap was a thing. you'd have to give like a long-winded explanation as to what exactly you were doing when it came down to no PMO. You couldn't just say, I'm doing Nofap, you know. But it seemed to me like pornography usage was just kind of part of life, you know. If your father found your stash, which happened to me, this was back before high-speed internet, you know, you'd go on like Google Images, you'd get some of those, you know, images, you'd download them, print them out, and then you'd, you know, you'd fap to still photos, for the most part. At least that's what I did. I know some folks, like, they somehow got their hands on like video and able to get away with it. I don't know how. I guess I was never that clever about those sorts of things, but you know, if your father found your stash, you know, it typically wouldn't be, you know, an, oh my god, my son's a porn user, a porn addict. It'll be, well, thank God he's not gay, assuming that your photos were of women, you know. And it was considered like a, you know, part of life. You know, you learn to masturbate, you learned how to find the pornography, you learned how to put the two together and get that sort of artificial experience where you know, it was like, oh, you know, you had sex in your mind with this girl or that girl or multiple women or what have you. So, you know, I grew up with that sort of understanding there, that assumption that it was part of life, you know. I remember this saying or this expression that I heard from some guys once. It was like that if you ask 4 guys if they it was like if they masturbate or if they watch pornography or something like that, if all of them, you know, say no they don't, then 3 out of 4 is lying, and the 4th one must be like a homo, or, you know, something's wrong with him, you know. And, you know, being that everyone back then, or at least the standard was, you know, being straight, you know, like I myself am, but back then, you know, the standard was, you know, heteronormative, so obviously, like, gay was like the catch-all for being deviant. So, you know, 4 guys say they don't watch it, or watch pornography, or masturbate. Well, 3 out of 4 of them are lying, and the 4th one is a deviant, you know. And I'm at that point where I realize now, you know, 150 something days in, it doesn't have to be that case. You don't have to be watching pornography, rubbing one out, obsessing about sex, and by extension, I'd say obsessing about women, obsessing about relationships, you know, trying to become a pickup artist, whatever. You know, you don't have to be doing that kind of stuff, and it's not necessarily that you have to switch to the polar opposite and be some raging deviant, you know, what everyone defines as being a raging deviant. It doesn't make you, oh, now you're suddenly, you know, you're not watching pornography, you're not masturbating, you're not trying to be a pickup artist, therefore you must be a, you know, homosexual. It's not like that, you know, life is just not like that. And there's a lot more freedom out there to, you know, choose to not live that life. And that's probably one of the biggest assumptions I've had. Top of assuming, like, you know, I was talking about way earlier, about, I suppose about believing that you could kind of determine, like, you know, based on looks, based on appearance, people's nature. Like, for instance, you're determining whether or not a girl is a pure, chaste, you know, loyal, trustworthy woman, you know, even though she's physically attractive, oh, she's not giving it up to all these other guys, you know, based on appearances, making that kind of assumption. You know, we have to really be careful what our assumptions are, because if we assume certain things to be true, that can oftentimes determine, you know, so many other aspects of our lives, so many other decisions, and it's like the assumptions themselves are not necessarily true. They can be scientifically and empirically tested, aka falsified, you know, and you can test them, you can have them studied and proven or disproven. Or if there's some sort of noetic experiential knowledge that you can access such that you can prove or disprove them, then, you know, I think we should go through that sort of process, you know, and not just accept things as being like that, being true, you know, just for the sake that they're assumptions and everybody else is doing it and we've heard it from 1,000 people and so on. Because, like, in the case of, you know, pornography addiction, I mean, I assumed that on some level that was natural. That's just the way it was supposed to be, and there was no real way out of it. and it was just gonna be a part of my life. I might abstain from it for a week or two, maybe 3 weeks, maybe a month, but somewhere along there, I would go back to it because, it was the default. The default was if you don't have a girlfriend, if you don't have a fiance, a wife, an actual woman there to have sexual relations with, well then, it's your hand, basically, or whatever else you think you're using. That would be your, stand-in partner, so to speak. That you couldn't live life without some form of, conscious sexual release, as opposed to wet dreams or nocturnal missions. That you would have to have some way of letting out that desire, that you couldn't like transmute it towards something else. And that assumption, is another one that probably the biggest one really that led to the pornography addiction. On top of all my traumas I've gone through, emotional traumas, where I just didn't know how to process my emotions and integrate them into my psyche, which is really kind of, I guess, the part of the definition of a trauma. Like, you feel overwhelmed by the experience, by the event in your life. You don't know how to process it, and you try to compartmentalize and just shove it down somewhere in your psyche and hide it away somewhere, and bury it with whatever you can. Like, for me right now, one thing I'm seeing as I'm doing a lot is stress eating, stress consumption of like food and drink. And part of me does want to go out and run and exercise, but it feels to me like slipping back into that old pattern when I was still living here. And there's a part of me that just wants to resist that, and just, it's like telling myself, just a few more days, another week, you'll be out of here. Even though going back up north, it doesn't necessarily have sort of an end-all catch-all solution to all my problems. I mean, I still have to contend with certain things, but even then, it's that little goal has been keeping me sane, telling myself that it doesn't have to last forever. It's not going to last forever. A few more days, a week, whatever. I can get the heck out of here and go back up to my place up north and put in my rent money and just have my space there. So that's another assumption that I used to have this assumption, kind of building on that whole topic, since I've talked about two of them already. I had that whole sort of assumption that that all this negativity, this toxicity, this it's really like abusive life down here, that it was going to go on forever and ever and ever. And as I talk about this, as I think about this, more stuff comes to the surface, and I realize that on top of the assumption that pornography was supposed to be a part of my life, on some level, the assumption that I could, determine like whether or not someone was going to go good or bad based on appearances, and I could have some sort of control over them. There was some sort of go-to group of women that I could, find a wife from who would be, quote unquote, not like all the others. This assumption that this whole negative, toxic, abusive life would continue to go on and on forever, it really kind of did drive me insane for a while there, and I think that's another reason why I would run off to PMO Fantasyland, because it was my way of escaping from something that I felt was inevitable, negative, abusive, hurtful, painful, and just, filled with suffering on one level or another, mostly mental, emotional suffering as opposed to physical suffering. But, having moved out of the house, and even though I'm back here for a bit, knowing that I can go back up north, I realized that these assumptions that we have about life, whether it relates directly to Nofap or not, we need to question them and really, figure out if they really truly hold water, scientifically, empirically, logically, rationally, and even experientially to some extent. Not relying on anecdotes, by the way, but realizing that it's kind of like we start limiting ourselves when we make the wrong assumptions, and we should question our assumptions so that we make sure that we're not limiting ourselves and making it almost like inevitable, like a self-fulfilling prophecy that our lives are not going to flower and become like the living dreams that we want them to be. So I'm going to finish up this video, head back down to my house. I'm going to upload this, and I have some travel footage from my trip to Morocco. I did put up 3 videos earlier, but I have something like 20 or 21 more videos. I like to put them up on this channel. I already put them up on my other channel, and I try to relax for a little bit, and then I guess I'm gonna have to do some chores before my dad gets home, because he's flying back to LA, and my sister went up to get him, and I was supposed to stay back and just look after the house, and I just decided to come out here quick and record. Let's do a little bit of reading. Got another law from the 48 Laws of Power read, and I may do a video on that, just relating to Nofap or life in general. But anywho, thanks for taking time out of your life to watch my content. Again, as always, I hope this does help someone out there. Just getting to talk about this stuff and get things off my chest, bring up repressed memories that are showing up in my dreams, and just discuss them, and just finally contend with this kind of stuff, as opposed to just letting it kind of run in my mind and then I forget about it and it comes back and nothing really gets done about it. That helps me, and I hope this helps someone out there as well. So I suppose I want to leave a question of sorts. What are your assumptions about life, and what are your assumptions about life that you feel have limited you or held you back, or not been helpful in terms of Nofap or just life in general? If you feel free to, if you want to comment, feel free to do that, in response to that question, or just the video in general, or Nofap or what have you. But just putting that question out there. Given that I talked about the concept of assumptions in this video. So anywho, thanks for the likes, the comments, and the subscriptions, and I'll see you folks around. Bye.